Cyprus, the counterintelligence podcast, hosted by IXN Solutions, the company you turn to for corporate counterintelligence expertise and creators of 351X. And we're live. Scott Sparks, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I am living the dream. It's a nice, cool 50 degrees here in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, which is very nice weather for this time of year. 2 days ago, it was 80. And so you can never predict what we're going to get from a weather standpoint down here. But today is pretty nice. How about you?
Yeah, same. I have a really good weather going on, and in the glorious state of Texas. But I got a question that I got to ask you, right? I don't know how many of our listeners realize that you are the king down there in the Gulf Coast, or should I say a duke down in the Gulf Coast? So it's fishing season, or Mardi Gras season, and you're pretty well tied in down there into that. And I happen to have seen some photographs of you in a pretty elaborate costume where you're a duke or some kind of Mardi Gras thing. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that, and I would challenge our listeners to go and try to find that image on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's Mardi Gras season for sure. Last weekend was the Crew of Hera ball, and I was fortunate enough to serve as a duke on the royal court. And so with that, you have to dress up in an old French style costume get up with feathers and a cape and all kinds of other stuff. But super fun. It was my first time ever being on the court. I didn't know what to expect, but it exceeded my expectations. I'll put it that way. And I will tell you, my liver is probably still recovering from that night. So if I stumble a little bit here and there during a podcast, you'll understand why it is that way. But over the next 3 to 4 weeks, I have the Crew of Neptune ball is going to happen February 7th. And then on the 14th of February, the Crew of Neptune does their big Biloxi parade. And it's the largest on the Gulf Coast. So much fun. And I encourage anybody, if you're anywhere near Biloxi, Mississippi on February the 14th, I encourage you to come and see that parade. It's beads, throws. I mean, it's just one big party all throughout the city of Biloxi. And it's a great time.
And Ryan will be rocking both feathers and a cape.
I will. And I'll be looking good at the same time. So, and probably feeling good as well. But Scott, so today's conversation, thank you for allowing me to elaborate on Mardi Gras, but we need to do business now. But sadly, we're about to talk about a topic that I wish we didn't have to have the conversation about. You and I and our guests have all spent decades fighting the terrorism fight across the globe. And we were hoping that job was done and we'd be able to turn the page and focus on counterespionage and counterintelligence topic. But the terrorism fight still continues to show up all across the globe. I mean, even here in the Gulf Coast region in New Orleans on January 1st of 2025, we had a truck incident where a terrorist came through and drove into a crowd of people and killed 14 people. Just recently, we had the Bondi Beach attack in Australia. I mean, we're seeing terrorism on the rise again. So even though it was a topic that we wish that we didn't have to discuss, unfortunately, we find ourselves here today. And there's no greater CT expert that I know than our guest, Brig Barker. Brig, welcome to the CI Press podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. And I feel like I should take sides here with the Texas-Mississippi standoff. I was born in Dallas, Scott, and lived in Dallas and lived in El Paso. So I feel like I'm leaning that way. And then there's this whole Ole Miss thing that I have relatives have gone there. So I feel conflicted. I'll just say that right up front. So
yeah,
that's what a great story. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh yeah, I was just saying you need to go with your roots. I mean, that's what you need to go with.
Okay, I'm leaning that way. So, but no, I appreciate you guys having me on. I admire everything you're doing from afar, and that whole fight you guys are in is so complex, so sophisticated. the threat actors are just rushing us in all these asymmetrical directions from different directions. And so I appreciate what you guys are doing every day.
Well, thank you, Brig, and thank you for being on the show. So we'd like to get some background on you, if you don't mind. I know you were an FBI special agent, but could you lead us into how you started to go down that direction, what led you to the FBI, and then kind of what you did while you were in the FBI? Maybe establish your bona fides.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of came by way of the Army. I did 5 years in the Army, and was stationed in Italy, which was a tough assignment, as you can imagine. But I did a tour in 1991 down in northern Iraq, and then did my captain's course and got out after that. And then I did 21 years in the FBI, and I started out working, criminal bank robberies, kidnappings, fugitives, all those fun things that a new young guy should do. And then 1998 happened, and I went over as part of an FBI tactical team, and went over to Nairobi, Kenya, as part of the Al Qaeda embassy bombings, of course, there in Kenya and Tanzania. And so I spent about a month over there, and I'll tell you, I just was like, this is all I want to do. I mean, it was just kind of the answer for everyone. Kind of finds a place. We all find our place in our career, and I'd done a number of things, and I'd also worked Persian organized crime, and I'd worked in gangs and things like that. But boy, started working this jihadist terrorism, and I really just found that that's all I wanted to do. And so that is what was kind of the beginning of my trajectory, working mostly Al Qaeda, homegrown violent extremists, and then kind of the end bookmark was ISIS when I retired in 2016. I'm glad to go into more detail on what I did along the way. I also did a couple of years as LNO at SOCOM down in Tampa, and then a couple of years embedded with another SOCOM element along the way.
Well, it's an exceptional career, and you wrote a book, and it's called The Dark Trajectory of Jihad. And I read it, and I will tell you, I was fascinated by all of the little tidbits of information and things that you were on the tip of the spear of the CT fight from an FBI perspective for, I guess, ever since 1998. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, I would say that was kind of the beginning for the FBI. I remember the embassy bombings happened. I was watching on TV, and they said, I think, basically it was like, we're going to send in the Marines. And then there was like a pause, and then it was, we're going to send the FBI. And so I'll tell you, we got over there and we were making it up. I mean, we had a prosecutor with us. There was this, group, this Al Qaeda group, and it was a lot of carnage there at the embassy attacks. And there were just a lot of folks involved as perpetrators, and we really didn't know what we had. And so that was, for me, it was kind of the beginning. And then from there, moving forward, there really was about probably less than 20 FBI agents that I know that were constantly going and involved in that case and 9/11 case, as far as Oconus, in a lot of different places. I spent most of my time rotating through Africa, was kind of my geography. And then I did, of course, some time in the Middle East as well. But it's just kind of what I love to do. I loved, they'd call up and say, can you go here? And I'd go there. And I just really, really enjoyed it. So, and working with a lot of different agencies along the way, and DOD and CBP and Border Patrol and all these that we've heard about it now at the southern border. It's there's just a lot of great folks out there that were all part of it. I was just really a cog along the way. So.
Yeah, you really, that truly was sort of the beginning of, some whole of government, type, efforts, right? I mean, the JTTF, was born sort of out of the embers of that event and 9/11 and all that kind of good stuff. So you were in it before it was in vogue, is what it boils down to.
Yeah, I mean, really, the JTTFs, and they have one in each FBI office, of course, at this point. it really is kind of the arm to this day, to include for the New Orleans attack that Ryan mentioned. As a recent plot disrupted in North Carolina. So as these plots or these attacks take place, the JTTF really is kind of the tip of the spear. And people ask me to describe what does a JTTF look like, and I say it looks like a room full of people. It's a room full of people, and there's a DoD guy there and a CBP guy there and et cetera, all these different agencies, and you just working together on whatever the latest priority is. I had the privilege of running two of them. One of them, I had a CI component where I learned that there's some really interesting things going on that side of the world, which I had no idea. But yeah, most of the focus is kind of the jihadist side of things. And so I loved it. My last one was San Diego. We're dealing with the border issues back then. And we'd have 20 folks show up from country X with no paperwork and no passports, no visas. And we're trying to sort out who's who and where they're going and that kind of thing. So it was great work. I loved every minute of it.
Counterterrorism really didn't take off, I think, until 9/11. And so from 98 to 2001, I don't think it got the attention that it really deserved, even though we were seeing attacks like the embassy bombings and the USS Cole attack and things were happening around the world. It just didn't seem to be front of mind for everybody. It was something that was happening in the Middle East and all of that stuff. But 9/11 really drove it home, like, okay, we're vulnerable to attack. What was it like being in the FBI, being in CT leading up to 9/11? And what was your reaction after that terrible terrorist attack?
Yeah. So 1998, I'll go back to that. So that was really an awakening for some of us, right? We were like, what is this group? What is their ideology? I've always been a why guy. I also want to understand why. And so for me, I was fascinated with the why after I left Kenya. I'd been in Kenya. I also worked in Uganda as part of that time. And so after 98, I really wanted to better understand the ideology. I went to the FBI Academy as a total introvert. I'm an introvert to this day, but they taught us how to interview and do interrogations. And so I make it through. And then I was like, I've got to get better at this. How do I talk to people? How do I talk to a suspect? I'd worked a lot of different things. And so sitting across the table with somebody and trying to get them to confess to, some, incident or robbery, whatever it might have been, it was kind of fascinating to me. So I wanted to learn how to do this. It was like put a rifle in your hand, go shoot and get better and better, better. So I started following a couple of guys that were legendary in the FBI, just amazing interviewers. And, I'm like the dog going, hey, can I sit in the room with you? Can I watch through the glass? But I just was absorbing this. And so I kind of took in what I was seeing was working and I started using it and I would butcher it pretty bad. And then I'd get a couple wins. And so I started to find some success in interviewing. And then I went into the CT realm and I just threw the playbook out. This is just not going to work with these folks. And so that was just, kind of what was leading in as far as my mind and understanding of how to do this. How do I get someone to confess? How do I get them to tell us what they're doing? And for me, the ultimate goal was to recruit them back into their cell, right? And so when I came back from the embassy bombings in 98, I started taking Arabic. The FBI started off these courses in Arabic, these immersion courses. So I started going to those. And I was studying everything I could on the ideology. And then 9/11 happened. And so I was a little bit primed, of course, not knowing this was going to happen. But when it happened, I felt, okay, I know a little bit, maybe know a little bit more than the next guy. And so I got a call and I went to Egypt and worked the 9/11 case from Egypt. Of course, there was one Egyptian hijacker, Mohammed Atta. He was the muscle hijacker. And so I got to go work in Cairo right after 9/11, which was fascinating. So I had a little bit of prep, when 9/11 happened. I understood just a little bit. And then that really, for me, 9/11 kicked off just kind of continuous rotations over doing human work or investigations or whatever it might be.
Oh, so that's fascinating. And so, I mean, after 9/11, I'm sure your op tempo was just out of control at that point. But in the course of reading your book, I mean, you created a model for interviewing people, and you, out of the thousands of interviews that you did, you said that you could really tell within minutes whether somebody was on the where they were at on the radicalization spectrum, or the road to radicalization. And I'd like to learn more about that method, RQRD. You mentioned it in your book, and then some of the methodology that you use to identify where somebody was at in that radicalization process.
Yeah, Ryan, I'll go into this, just say big picture radicalization. Like I'll go and teach now on radicalization 2 weeks straight, 8 hours a day. There's so much to it. And I always say no, like the first leg of the letter A in the alphabet on this. But as far as radicalization, I was interviewing these folks and I was just learning, like, this is what helps build rapport. This is what they want to talk about if I do get to build rapport. And so I would say I started to hit my groove at about 10 years working this, right? I was just trying to understand like what's going on in their mindset. And so when I look at radicalization as a process, I always say there are triggers that put them on the road. So let's take the New Orleans attacker, right? The triggers that put them on that road of radicalization are generally unpredictable. We don't know what the trigger is going to be to put them on the road. What the road looks like, at least for me, is pretty predictable. I kind of know the evolution, what that's going to look like. And then the trigger to action at the end is, again, unpredictable. So what takes that New Orleans guy where he says, tomorrow we're doing this, we're going to get it on, But that road of radicalization, after I interviewed so many of these guys, just taking it in, kind of consuming, listening to, what was in their mind and in their heart, I started to figure out, okay, this is where this guy I think is, And so for me, again, 10 years in, I started feeling like I could go sit in a room with the guy. I had to build rapport with him. I had to do that to get anywhere, especially if I wanted to try to recruit him back into his group, right? And so, so I had things I did, and for me, like 30,000 foot, I always wanted to know what country they were from, So if we're not talking about just a homegrown, kid living in his mom's basement, right? It's an Egyptian, for instance. There's a whole mural for me if it's Egypt, right? So if I'm going to talk to an Egyptian, there's certain things I know. There's certain things I'm going to bring up. I'm going to bring up, the comedian Adil Imam. He's a well-known comedian. Every Egyptian knows him. It just relaxes their shoulders. It helps build rapport. I'm going to talk about Adil Imam's movies that I've watched, and I'm just going to talk about when I was in Egypt and. As I was learning Arabic, I started with modern standard Arabic, and then I did take Egyptian dialect at one point. I'm going to try to use some dialect, words along the way, just again to relax them. So I'm just trying to relax them. So once I have that, and that's in the RQRD kind of process for me, is the rapport, and then I've got 10 or 12 questions. Like it was just after a while, I just would know this is what's going to come up, and so. Once I've got rapport, I felt like I somewhat had them, so I could really find out what's going on in their mind. And so, so I'd ask them questions like, "What do you think about the situation in Palestine currently?" And to us, it's kind of a thermonuclear question. It's, it gives rise to, anger and other things in a lot of different people. But if a guy's radical, that question I always found would show me something. There would be almost a visceral reaction, right? What do you think? And back in the middle of the GWAT, what do you think about what's going on in Mosul in Iraq right now? So I had certain questions like what help me understand what is a true definition of kafir. I've heard this term, infidel. And again, certain things would give visceral reactions. So in my mind, after I had 10 or 12 questions, I started feeling like this guy's not radical. I'm all about the facts here, right? FBI, we end up in court, right? We have to testify in court. Can't just be just kind of fantasy discussion. This has to be something that we can go into court with evidence. And so, once I had some comfort, built rapport, asked some questions, I started feeling like, yeah, this guy's radical. He's not, or he's very radical. This guy it's a powder keg, and at any minute, this guy could be triggered to action. So I'd leave his house. I always loved to go to their house. I didn't want to meet him at Starbucks. Like if I had a meeting set up, I'd rather just meet you at your house. I could see what's on your wall. I could look at your library. That was critical for me. And then I could usually walk away. And this is no special skill or talent of me or my intellectual capability. This is just reps, right? And so I'd be able to walk away feeling pretty comfortable, go back and brief management, say, we've got a problem, or I don't think we have a problem with this guy. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's some cool quotes that come out of the book, and most extremists are searching for meaning, not theology, so that to me is pretty profound. And and identity matters more than knowledge, religious knowledge, right? Because we always think, to the layperson, we always think, oh, these guys are all religious extremists, but that's not necessarily the case. And you're talking about, that discovery that's come out, through the different interviews that you do. So with that being the case, I mean, what do we do about that? It sounds like the range is just massive for these folks.
Yeah, it really is, Scott. I mean, and it's a complicated problem, because we have an ideology. I mean, if you look at, Islam, there's four denominations essentially under Sunni Islam, which is a majority of Muslims. Al Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, Shabab, all these guys, they don't fall into those four mainstream schools of Sunni Islam. And I always say, the majority of Muslims in the world will never become a jihadist. Is there a small percentage? Yes. Do we need to understand that enemy? And you guys, I can't imagine your knowledge on the CI side with the enemy. I couldn't even sit in a room and discuss that with you because you know so much. But with that small percentage of folks that go, I want to become an ISIS guy, it's a small percentage, but we need to understand that enemy. And that's where I spent most of my time. Now, the other thing I'll say is, I had a very unique way I'd interview these guys. I mean, these are humans, right? It's like the bank robbers that I used to interview in Los Angeles. There was a cause. He had a heroin addiction. He had a gambling problem, whatever it was. He was a human that had some kind of, fade into this situation. I'm not giving him an excuse. In fact, I'm ready to throw him in prison for as many years as possible. But this jihadist guy is a human, and there's something that caused that. And so I was always trying to figure that out. But it was always, some kind of trigger. And I'm not someone that jumps to mental illness for the jihadist side. There are definitely some guys that do have that. That was not my experience interviewing these guys. A lot of times they had something happen in their childhood, or they saw their cousin get killed, in Gaza or whatever it was that kind of put them on that road of radicalization. But they were all humans. And so I would sit there and talk to them like a human. And, guys at the office would say, Brig, you're such a social worker. But I used it as part of the GWAT because I know we have things that we do. We have, kind of whack-a-mole, approaches to certain things, which needs to be done. For me, I was always looking at more holistic approach. What can we do with this guy to stop what 20 guys in his group are doing, or before they do it, So I was always trying to look at kind of the bigger picture, but I also saw him as a human. And so they would meet with me all the time. Like I'd say, hey man, it was great talking to you today. Are you around next week? Yeah. Stop by. In fact, I want to introduce you to some other guys, some friends of mine. And then I've got more exposure. And so for me, it's red, white, and blue for me. But I'm also using some kind of unique tools is where I found my my space in this realm to do more as part of a bigger picture in this fight, I guess.
One of the things I really enjoyed in the book, as you described, converting to Islam, and it's very easy to become a Muslim. But you were also explaining the process to become a true Muslim. It takes years. I mean, it's a lot to study, a lot to learn, and there's an entire process for that. But then you said that people would get caught up in that and be overwhelmed with it, and then there was a solution, the Salafi jihadist method. It's to convert them by providing them an easier path to becoming a true Muslim. Could you speak to that? I thought that was a fascinating part of your book.
Yeah, what I've found, and I like when I speak at conferences, I have some pretty cool slides to kind of show this process. But if you take prison for an example, right? If you go into prison, you need to affix yourself to a group, for protection and things like that. And I spent a lot of time working in prisons, interviewing guys, so you all see it. Everyone is connecting with a group because they need to. But if someone converts in prison, right, because they want to affix themselves with the Muslim group there, generally they're going to convert to Sunni Islam. It's about 85% of Muslims, right? And most prisons have an imam, that meets with them Fridays and things. But there's again those four schools of, it's called fiqh or FIQH, or madhab is another term for it. But it's essentially a school of jurisprudence or denomination. So if you think about Protestantism with Baptists, Lutheran, etc., there's four schools in Sunni Islam, and so if a guy converts where he says the Shahada 3 times, he's really officially a Muslim. But then the journey ahead of them is kind of fraught with a lot of heavy work. And so part of that is studying the Quran, as we know, and learning the Quran. But also there's a book underneath the Quran called the Tafsir, which provides context to the different verses in the Quran, so kind of what was going on at the time in the Middle East and who the leaders were and what battles were going on. So already, you're going in deep, right? It's the Quran, and really, if you are kind of following protocol, you should read the Quran in Arabic, right? So really, at the same time, you need to be learning Arabic, which reads right to left, and there's no vowels, so you have to learn the diacritic symbols above and below a letter. And so you start to learn slowly this new language as you're reading this religion, try to understand the Quran and the context below it. And then there's the Sunnah, which is, or Ahadith as they call it, is the rules of Islam, thousands of rules of exactly how you should live your life. I mean, Islam is a life system, right? So you have the Quran, Tafsir, you're learning Arabic, and then you have the Sunnah, which are many, many rules. And then all those are in context according to one of the four schools that you are following, right? And then you need to learn how to pray. Praying is different in the different schools of fiqh. And also we want you to follow and read books by certain imams and videos and things like that. So what I always describe it as a rucksack, right? Go back to my Army days, right? And the Ranger instructors are like, here's a 5-gallon water can, and here's another 5-gallon water can. You're going to carry this too. And so eventually they will find themselves very loaded down. And every day you're learning more, And then what can happen is this Salafi jihadist guy, kind of an ISIS type guy, an extremist, comes up, and he's probably been eyeballing this guy at the mosque and says, hey man, you're doing it all wrong. Let me lighten your load. And he takes that big old heavy ruck off of him, takes the 5-gallon water cans away from him, and he says, here's a light day pack. Why don't you come hang out with the 5 of us brothers? We're true believers, actually, and we can explain more to you about that. And we go to a mobile home on Fridays, and we've got our own imam, and he teaches us, and it's just going to be a whole lot easier. And then they say, these are the verses that you need to read in the Quran, verse 9:5, and the 2 that talk about smiting necks, and they lighten his load. So there's this natural progression towards, boy, it's a lot less effort, right? And so thus begins that journey down towards that radicalization road we were discussing.
And you had gotten so good at this, understanding this whole process, that you were able to identify the roles inside these terror cells, where you'd have the action guy, and then you'd have the ideologue, and some support role players, and even women in some respects. Could you break that down for us? I mean, you could spot and see like who was playing what role inside a terrorist cell.
Yeah. So, as time goes on, and again, I'll use that scenario of, I'm talking to a guy, I'm trying to recruit him, and hey, can I meet you next week? And he says, hey, we've got 5, Jordanian brothers, and I'll introduce you to those guys. And hey, great, love it. Always said yes, let's go, let's do more, keep the momentum going. And so I'd sit with these guys, Saudis, Jordanians, whatever it is, and hey, what do you do? Oh, well, I'm Muhandis. Well, I know that means engineer, right? And then this guy, he knows fulus, he knows money, right? So he's potential. So, and of course, I'm trying to, in my P brain, trying to gather like, what is the hierarchy here of this group? So I usually knew there was kind of an overseer, right? Usually an older guy. I'll use my age as an example, right? There's an older guy. He kind of oversaw, kind of kept everyone in line type thing, that older mentor. And then sometimes you'd have the ideological guy, the kind of the sheikh guy who really knew their version of the Quran and the Sunnah, and what they wanted everybody to follow as far as the theology of things, right? And then you had a money guy, right? And that guy nowadays knows crypto, and he knows all the nuances of moving money and things like that, and keeping track of money and zakat, maneuvers into their group, money that's been donated at a certain mosque. There's some extremist mosques out there in the U.S. getting that money in, and then you got an IT guy, like that guy. He just knows, those guys, like they know tech, right? And I've had teenagers, in our family, like those guys just know it way better than I do. And then you just have general supporters, the hanger on folks that, hey, I want to help out, and it's, to me, it was always like the bell curve. Like, you got a couple leaders in the middle of the curve, you've got some strong folks that are going to do some great things, the IT guy, the money guy, whatever. And then at the tail end of that bell curve, you got just some folks that keep showing up. I'm on board, and they're maybe a little conflicted. And so I always looked for, if we talk about, the human side of things, those conflicted folks I also felt were vulnerable. And so I'd try to peel them off if I could, meet them individually and say, man, there's something about you. I feel like you don't love this group you're part of. What's going on? And it's after I built rapport with this guy, and yeah, I just don't know if I can really get on board with what they want to do. And so we might be able to, recruit that guy type thing. So, but yeah, there's the whole, if you look at old Al-Qaeda, the old hierarchy, you have this committee, that committee. And so even a small cell in the US, a homegrown violent extremist cell, they still delegate, they still get organized, a lot of times. So yeah, eventually you just start seeing who's who, right?
That's awesome. To be able to get that close to these groups that, before they've, done anything it's really impressive. One of the things that we see, more on the rise here in recent years is, sort of individual radicalization, people that aren't part of groups necessarily, right? So, I mean, it seems even harder, to try to discern and figure out a way to, to stem the tide, if you will. What about, sort of modern, this, like in this today's day, feels maybe familiar? Does some of it feel different? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question, Scott. It's definitely evolving. I mean, now we're seeing such a movement with the youth and radicalization. They're isolated. They're online. There's plenty of radical mentors available to you online, right, in different forums. And so there's this whole online piece of this now that's it's frightening, how they can radicalize this kid, online, and hey, make sure you're reading these books and things like that. And you can order these books on Amazon. You can have everything you need. And I'm going to send you a video to watch. And they watch a video about grievances regarding what's going on in the Middle East, or, here's U.S. forces, killing our brothers in Syria, that kind of thing. And so these guys can get very radical. I never buy into someone gets radicalized on their own, though. I mean, that every time we had, the last big case I worked domestically was the San Bernardino attack. If you guys remember, married jihadist couple, they go and drop their 6-month-old off at grandma, and they go and they just light up a Christmas party, kill people, and then they get in a police chase. And then at the end of the police chase, the female jumps out and starts, shooting at the cops. They both get killed. The Pulse nightclub attack in Orlando, horrible attack. The Boston bombing attack, was a little bit involved in that one. And so I think the media, not to bash the media, but the media tends to go right to radicalized alone, mental illness. And I just can't get on board until we know a lot more, with that. But I think things are evolving, and the advantages to the young radical jihadist that wants to have his own, 15 seconds of fame or whatever it might be. That before we weren't facing that kind of cloak of, protection. My take was, when I ran 2 JTTFs, was I said, knock on every door. So if something popped up, a quasi lead or whatever, I'd say, go knock on the door. Go knock on the door. I kept saying, and eventually the agents would come to me and say, hey, and I'd said, you know what I'm going to say? I say, go knock on the door. Like if you look at the 93 World Trade Center bombing, right? Ramzi Youssef was the main engineer. They built the bomb in New York. And when he was interviewed, he said, we kept building the explosive device because no one knocked on our door. And so even when I speak at, law enforcement conferences, I say, go knock on the door. You got to knock on the door. You still got to be aggressive, because we can still find that kid in his mom's basement online and maybe see the library books that he has and things like that, or at least sit down with him and talk to him.
Another fascinating point that you point out in the book is about the ideologues, the people that are actually doing the radicalization. And we've all seen the videos. I mean, they're sitting there, it's really boring looking. I mean, the guy's not animated in any way. In many cases, he's just talking to the mic. And you said that you can't put your finger on it, but you think it was the Arabic that they were using. And as an Arabic linguist, can you provide some insight on why you feel the Arabic that they're using is actually the most effective means of radicalization?
Yes. And by the way, my book went through pre-publication review. I just want to say that it took 6 months for the FBI to finally approve it, but everything got approved. It's mesmerizing. Like now I've kind of a little bit of a tuned ear for Arabic, and I can, that is such a deep ocean. It's like ideology. It's a deep ocean as well. But even if I hear certain Arabic, it is very charismatic and very mesmerizing if it's done right, And so there's something to that, and they have these songs called nasheeds, and that's kind of mesmerizing to these folks as well. So there's something, and I used to sit with some of these, folks that would recite the Quran from memory, it's fascinating. You're kind of drawn to it. And so, I mean, I was always kind of like, I know it's like when I worked crimes against children, like I had to review all the evidence of every case. It was horrible to have to see all these images and videos and things like that. But I was always 30,000 foot above it, knowing this is evidence, so when I would sit in alongside some of these folks in the recruitment process, and I could hear their Arabic and the nasheeds and, call to prayer and things like that. It is kind of mesmerizing if you know the sounds. Arabic has a very unique sounds to the different letters. And like when I have a friend of mine, DOD guy, retired DOD guy, and he kind of speaks Arabic to me, but it's kind of an American speaking English. I can hear, it's very American. But if you hear the Saudi, the depth and the sound of it, you can just feel it's a lot more visceral in the conversation, and you can tell oftentimes where someone's from. I can tell an Egyptian I can't really tell an Egyptian from a Yemeni, but I can tell an Egyptian from Saudi. So it's kind of this little cave you go into, and you hear the sounds and the echoes and things like that. And it is very mesmerizing to a kid sitting on the fence thinking, I don't know if I should follow this guy, this ideologue or not. And then they hear their Arabic and they go, yeah, I think I'm going to follow this guy, or at least test the waters, So it's almost something I can't explain. But they are definitely, it draws them off the wall.
That's amazing. It's like casting a spell, over.
It is. Yeah, I can tell you, Scott. Like I would sit in a room with these guys, and if they were sold out, if there wasn't any coming back. And we can talk about countering violent extremism and rehabilitation, all this. But when I saw these guys they were gone, they were already down that road. I just knew we couldn't get them back. It was that. In like a SWAT school or something where you're just so exhausted, you're running with your rifle and you have that 1,000-mile stare. That's the stare that they would have. And I'd walk away saying, I'd go back to the office and say, we got a problem. We got a really bad problem right here. So.
Yeah. So, a couple of, you say that they rarely see themselves as villains, right? The ones that radicalize, and that, that violence is framed as a moral duty. So, once they hit that stage, are you saying that there's no turning back?
I'm saying it's tough. It's very tough. What happens is in a group, if you think about mentors you've had, leader mentors, maybe in the military, whatever, and you're like, boy, I'd follow that guy off a cliff type thing. That's how they see some of these ideologues. They're charismatic. They're smart. Look at Muhammad Atta, like that guy. He was picked because he was a leader. He was savvy. He was smart. And people followed him. And so these guys have these ideologues that they'll follow him anywhere. And so what happens is, that guy one day will wake up and tell this kid, hey, look, you've been specially picked by Allah to carry out a mission. And that's after a grooming process. And that kid goes, Alhamdulillah, thanks be to Allah. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me, right? This is a kid maybe that's marginalized in school, has no friends, gets bullied, and all of a sudden he's been picked by God to do something, and he believes it. It is tough to bring that back. Now we just got to, kinetically disrupt that before it happens. Go out, raid, arrest, whatever we can do to stop that. But boy, once they're running down that road, it's really hard to trip it up.
Which brings us to kind of the next topic. We've been fighting the CT fight for 20 years, and we kind of destroyed the ISIS caliphate in Syria, even though I think, there's still some remnants. But you had 60,000 ISIS fighters kind of in that location. Well, they dispersed, and they went back to other locations. Can you kind of give us your insight on where you think the next terrorism problem is, or a current state of the CT fight, and where we go from here?
Yeah, great question. Strategic level, right, Ryan? Well, I know we've got we've got China, we've got Russia, we've got Iran, we have a lot going on. We have Venezuela. Seems like the world's on fire. There's a lot happening, right? I think we would all agree, based on all of our experience here and monitoring things for so many years. I think that, 15 years ago, I kind of in the middle of the fight, I would just constantly say, boy, eventually, these folks will go back to their home countries, and they know how to create a cell. They know how to communicate in encrypted, messaging. They know how to build a device. They know how to raise money and move money. So I'm not saying I'm a prophet boy, but it just, I mean, I think we all kind of saw this would eventually happen. So it's, it's metastasized, and now we're seeing it all over the globe. I think, boy, we could talk hours on all this, but, I think Europe's got a lot of problems that I don't know they can come back from at this point. There's country by country, they have so many issues, and each country's problem is different than the next. Germany's problem is different than France, and last time I was over there and I met with national police from a number of different countries, and they said because of Schengen, we don't know who's in our country. It's just a free for all. You don't have to show papers at certain borders. And so they've got a problem. And then I look at Syria is very complicated. I think Syria is very complicated right now, especially with the new leader. And, Giuliani, U.S. forces picked him up, setting an IED out in Iraq, and he went to Kambuka, and he was there with Baghdadi. And now he's aligned, in certain ways that we're kind of standing next to. And so I think that's complicated. We have Iran, which, I'm sure we could do 10 podcasts on that right now. And I took Farsi at one point because I was fascinated with the language, and it was way easier than Arabic, by the way. But I couldn't get the French in it, but so I kind of track what's going on in Iran and their proxies, Hezbollah, and, everything going on in Yemen and Lebanon and all those things. But I think my greatest concern is Africa. I mean, I would say, and I'm an Africa hand, that's where I went. That's where I worked so much. But I see this burgeoning new caliphate starting that I think at some point is going to be declared in the Sahel. I look at Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire and all those, into the West Africa. It's just growing so fast. And I think that at some point we're going to have our next caliphate declared there, like we did in Mosul, basically. And I think the problem is that there's going to be a call to hijra. They're going to have that same call, come to the caliphate, live in a utopian world with other like-minded Muslims, which will be a radical version, of course, not moderate Muslim, not moderate Islam. And I think there's going to be a lot of expeditionary folks that get involved in that. And expeditionary as in they go there, they get trained, and then who's the great Satan? They're coming to America, So for me, I think Africa is probably the greatest problem right now. And there's no one addressing it for the most part. We were there. The French were there. The French did some really good things there, having kind of worked in that area. But now we have these coalitions, of African countries with great intentions, but they don't have our capability. They don't have the French capability. They've learned some things from us. But to deal with this, Russians are there, the Chinese are there, which you guys could talk for hours on, I'm sure. So to me, big picture, like I see that's the biggest problem. And then you have folks in the US, right? Coming back to the homeland, we're always going to have these lone wolves, that in the end declare their bayat to ISIS and ISIS leader, that on Facebook or whatever, and are going to carry out attacks, So that for me, that's like kind of one over the world. I haven't talked about Asia yet. So.
Mankami Farsi sobat mikano. So I know
there we go.
a little bit, yeah. So not enough to order a beer, but no, I agree with you. I think Africa is a big problem, and I've worked false defector cases in the past where you'd have a defector come in and seek asylum, get asylum, and then they would get their documents as a citizen, but it allowed them to travel across the globe. And we found cases that started in Asia with a false defector, and then they made their way to the United States and they were scoping out bases and that sort of thing. I see the same problem kind of in Europe. You have these people that are seeking asylum or defecting or just migrating into Europe. They're eventually going to get papers, which allows them to travel. And I think it's just going to give them unfettered access to the United States. And how do we screen them out? I think it's a real challenge for us.
Screening out, that's if we could find that out, brand that, and we could charge for it, right? So, I mean, this is my answer to the screening. All we have to do is, use my, jihadist ideological interviewing process with every single person that comes in from a country of concern. I mean, that's all we have to do. It'll be real simple, right? But I do think you need deep vetting, and I don't know how that works, with the quantity that, haven't worked the San Diego border, the quantity that, and I don't know what it looks like at this moment. But unless, I would have to sit with the guy for 5 hours to really have a feel for where he was on radicalization and is he part of some operational activity, So it's tough. It's a tough one.
Yeah, deep vetting. Holy smoke. I mean, imagine, how many years did it take you to develop the skills that you brought to the table to be able to do the type of things that you do, and then to sort of outsource that to our force to be able to execute that at scale. It's a scary challenge is what it boils down to.
It is.
But one of the things that they need to do is they need to read your book. So why don't you tell us a little bit
There
about
you go. I mean, it's I wrote that because I would speak at law enforcement conferences, and cops would say, "Hey, is this written down somewhere?" And I said, "It's in my head. That's where it is." And so eventually, I just started writing it, and it's you can read it in a night. I mean, it's like a big pamphlet. Really, it's like a large pamphlet. But I just. For me, I was trying, it wasn't a There I Was book. That's not what I was trying to do, but I was trying to make it a little bit interesting in that using vignettes, like I was, interviewing this, ISIS bride, and here's the techniques I used. And this is, something applicable that others can use type thing. So I didn't write it to make money. I just wrote it to try to get the word out, is really kind of was the goal of that. So.
Well, it's a fantastic read, and you're right. I read it in about 2 hours, but the vignettes were exceptional and really drove home the points that you were making. And so I encourage everybody to go out and buy the book, read the book. The CT fight is not going to go away. I think it's here to stay. And, if history shows us anything, it's going to come back around. So, Brig, we're getting pretty close to time now, and I wanted to open up the floor to have your final thoughts. Maybe talk about what you're doing now, what you plan to do later. And then, if anybody wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Yeah. And again, I appreciate you guys bringing a CT guy on. I feel like you're going to bully me a little bit, which is warranted, right? But no, I really appreciate just being able to chat about this. The CT fight's not going anywhere. I had this very cool opportunity to co-wrote an episode for Criminal Minds, and it was a Guantanamo Bay terrorist. And so I got to do all the dialogue and everything. And there I had the terrorist say, "Jihad is forever." And like, I feel like, it's just tossed it in there. And, but I feel like it's going to be enduring. How long has this been going on? When did, pirates start, many, many, many years ago. Right. And there's a long history. And like when I teach at conferences, I give the history. I talk about Ibn Taymiyyah and Abdullah Azam, and I talk about Sayyid Qutb and Muhammad Qutb and all these folks, so that there's context to everything that we just discussed. But for me, I'm still in it. I work for a company called Balance Global. It's an amazing group of people. I'm their counterterrorism advisor on certain things, and they're just doing some super innovative things with digital exhaust and training. And anyways, it's fantastic. But basically, I'll say, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm out there, posting things on CT all the time, and I give some opinions and things like that. I always say to folks, just reach out to me there, connect with me on LinkedIn. Sometimes that turns into other things, which is great. But usually that's kind of my platform. I'm not really on other social media, but I find that LinkedIn is very professional. I learn a lot from folks. I learned a lot from you guys. Your other podcasts, some of them are It's amazing the things that you guys are putting out. So so I appreciate you, trying to impart that knowledge that you have. And so that's kind of what I do on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. It's good to see you out on LinkedIn. It's good to see all the good gouge that people need to be aware of the threat environment and what they can do about it, and certainly help professionalize the force, right? Because especially the young agents that are out there that are just getting into the business, it's good to have sort of a sounding board for the different aspects of the career.
Yeah, and I just like I used to, and I still teach at law enforcement conferences. Like I go to the individual cop on a beat in New York. I say, you really need to learn this stuff because you're the guy that's going to be, these guys work like 2 blocks, right? They cover 2 blocks and they get to know everybody in that area. And they're the ones that are going to say something's wrong with this one guy, or they have an informant who says, you should look at this guy. And that's where it really matters. The FBI is going to get involved somewhere down the road, probably. But those individual cops, they can make a difference. And I've had cops that I've worked with, they say, it's my first day, but I need you to start teaching me Arabic, because I want to understand, I want to recruit and all these things. And so I love those kind of guys. They make a huge difference and they go back to their departments eventually. And then they kind of spread that wealth. So.
Well, Brig, thank you so much. I've learned so much from talking to you, so much from your book. And I was in this for 20 years and had no idea. I mean, I know you mentioned that in the book as well, as that people just don't understand what they're up against. And so I encourage everybody to read the book, follow Brig on LinkedIn, reach out to him, talk to him, listen to this podcast. Thank you so much for being a guest. You really have shed light on a really important topic.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Scott. I'm going to stay out of the Texas-Mississippi fight at this point. I'm going to just withdraw.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Well, Scott, this is another excellent episode. Thank you so much for being a co-host, and going to open the floor for your final thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to echo, go out and buy Brig's book, absolutely. And then, if you like CT, that's great. Buy Brig's book, and put it into action. If you like counterintelligence, continue to listen to our podcast. You can find that. You can find all the links to that at our website, ixnsolutions.com. You can also sign up for IXN Dispatch via our website at ixnsolutions.com, where we have some publications, and every single episode of this podcast is available there. And if you like swag, because you love CI, you can get CI swag there too. So hit up our website, ixnsolutions.com, crawl through it, and get yourself sort of inculcated with all the CI love that sits there. Back to you, Ryan.
Hey, Brig.
I loved all that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then, okay, for me, again, I'll end it the same way that we always end it, with what I've coined as R3. If you come in contact with a threat or a risk, recognize it for what it is, react to it properly, and then report it to security professionals or law enforcement so that we can take action on it. You reporting your concerns could actually stop the next terrorist attack within the United States. So educate yourself on what that looks like. Read Brig's books, and then be a really good U.S. citizen and report these threats and current concerns so that we can address them. And with that, thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to talking to you the next time.